It's just a colored dial with a cheap Chinese movement inside. I could do that. Who buys trash like this? Studio Underdog is just hot air. Those are some of the comments I've seen about Studio Underdog. When I posted a picture during Watches and Wonders of a table full of what I called copies of Studio Underdog watches, I was flooded with reactions. There's a conversation here about what is originality, about what constitutes a copy, about the value of design, and about the standards we apply to different watch brands. So I'm resetting the clock on days since Studio Underdog was last mentioned. Let's dive in. Studio Underdog are a small British brand who have been a media and community darling for a couple of years now. They hit the stage with a signature design language of colorful, playful takes on classic designs. So bi-compacts in a watermelon colorway or green guacamolos and sunset pinks. The pricing is in the range of around 600 to 1,000 euros, with one or two that are a little bit more expensive given a much better movement inside and a few other cool features. And then there's also the collab with Moser they did a while back, which resulted in the creation of a set of two watches, one priced at the Studio Underdog level and one priced at the Moser level. They've also done collabs with Fears and a couple of others. Personally, I have two feelings about Studio Underdog. On the one hand, I think they are fun, they are inventive, they are novel. I can't think of a lot of brands that inhabit the same space. Swatch do to some extent, Mr. Jones do. There are probably others, but it's a small space. Louis Vuitton do as well, honestly. But more importantly, they are design-wise unlike any other. You know a Studio Underdog watch immediately, and you wouldn't confuse it with a Swatch or the other way around. There's a distinct Studio Underdog look. On the other hand, it's not the kind of watch I buy. Simply because I don't wear a lot of colorful watches. I'm attracted to the idea of a playful watch, but when push comes to shove, I'm likely throwing on a black bezel diver or a blue Sunray dial sports watch. I'm a boring conservative person that respects what Studio Underdog brings to the table. It's just not a type of watch that I usually choose to spend my money on. And now we're at the copies. So we have to do the old dictionary thing and say, what does the dictionary say about a copy? It's a thing made to be similar or identical to another. Right off the bat, there is a difference between a facsimile, which is an identical recreation of something. A copy doesn't have to be identical. There's the watch with the compact style and a colorway in common. There's a watch that's mainly the colorway, and there's a watch that's got its own colorway, but the design language is very reminiscent of a Studio Underdog design language. And then there's the one that most people got irritated about, which is the San Martin, which basically just has two colors in common with the Studio Underdog. A vocal minority felt that it was unfair that I called this a copy. Some people also stated then everything must be a copy to you. Now, hopefully you're thinking this video feels original. If you're still with me in this video, it might be because you like what I'm bringing to the table. If so, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel massively. Thanks a ton. Anyway, there's a clear logic to why I called them copies. I've got a test that I apply. I stand by the assertion that all these watches are homages or replicas or inspired or copied from the Studio Underdogs. And that's because of the test. It has three parts: similarity, context, idea. Similarity is the first part of the test. When I look at the watch, do I think, oh, it looks like or it reminds me of? Every single one of these watches have some element which I can clearly say reminds me of something of a Studio Underdog. Some more than others, but all of them have a tick box. And yes, a Tudor Ranger reminds me of a Rolex Explorer as well. But similarity can be coincidental. Two brands launch a pick dial on the same day doesn't mean that one stole the idea from the other. That's why the next check is context. When did all these watches come out? They came out after the Underdog watches. The timing indicates very clearly that there was likely not an independent creative spark that led to these watches being created. The context is Studio Underdog did a watermelon colorway, and shortly thereafter, San Martin released their colorway. Which takes me to the last piece, the idea. Some people will rightly claim that Studio Underdog doesn't have a patent on a red and green watermelon colorway. And you're completely correct. They don't. Never claimed they did. Rolex also doesn't have a patent, or maybe they did, but the Cyclops. Since watches have existed, I'm guessing there have been more colorways attempted than I will ever see. But tell me this, where can you find right now, in recent history, a brand that combines these two colors? Or even in old history. I mean, Maybe you could argue that the subdial on a skipper is slightly watermelony, but honestly, I think we'd be reaching for examples. I can find some Royal Oak dials with fume that remind me of the Goofy Panda. I can find a few watches with a Salmon Panda combo, but they're far more restrained than any Underdog watch. So it's not just about copying the color. It's about copying the idea of mixing those colors. Not every aspect of the watch has to be similar, because the bar is whether or not the idea has been leveraged. And in these watches, the idea of the Studio Underdog has been leveraged or copied or recreated. Now, I don't really care that these are copies. I'm not arguing for Studio Underdog's intellectual property rights at all. But all these watches are similar enough in design. The context of their release clearly indicates that they did not come up with these designs themselves. And finally, there's a clear idea behind the Underdog watches that the others have leveraged to a greater or lesser extent. So that's why I called them copies. Secondly, I called them copies because they failed the test and they haven't tried to build on the effort of the original. They haven't really, in my mind, bar maybe one example, tried to take something to a new level. In this specific context, the word copy is a little bit derogatory. That's my second piece. These watches all failed the test in terms of similarity, context, and idea, but so does a Christopher Ward 12 with a Chapek and Tartique. But I don't call that watch a copy. I don't call the Cubitus a copy of the Nautilus either. Why? Because it's a continuum. Some watches are inspired by. Some watches are just homages and some are copies. I'm not totally consistent with how I use those terms, but for me, the end of the scale where words like replica or copy or ripoff come into play are where I see watches where nothing independently meaningful has been added. There was no attempt to develop the idea meaningfully to create a standalone distinctive product. The Christopher Ward 12 is similar to a Chapek. There were people who worked on both watches, and the timing of the 12 definitely adds some context. And yes, there is a question where the idea comes from, but I still would never call one or the other a copy. Because in the 12 and in the subsequent 12s, there's an effort and an outcome that resulted in something meaningfully different. That's why the avocado from Proxima, I think, is labeled a copy by me, despite them actually trying to come up with their own colorway. They at least put in a teeny tiny bit of effort, but the outcome was just not good. The color combo is bad. The detailing is bad. They don't really understand the idea. They only understood the colors. So where San Martin put in literally no effort, Proxima at least put in some effort. The outcome just wasn't good enough to set itself apart from the original. So for me, it gets labeled a copy. From there, you have the next set of comments. Comments like, what's so original about these Studio Underdog watches? It's just a sourced Chinese SH11T movement, a colored dial, and an expensive price. Well, there's two problems with that. I did a video a few months back where I said a watch is comprised of 5 elements: brand, identity, creativity and design, craft, so handmadedness, manufacturing of the body, manufacturing of the movement. A Rolex is high on identity, high on manufacturing quality, high on movement quality. They're somewhere in the mid-range on craft. It's after all a mass-produced watch, more so than a high-end piece. And in terms of design, there's a clear Rolex design language, which might seem stale to some people because it's been so consistent over time and it's been around for a long time. But they have throughout the years put an effort into the creation of those designs. They come up with this combination of finishings and dials and colors all themselves. Now, Formex, as an example, are, for the price, incredibly high on core manufacturing. I would argue that's where their strength really is. They also put work into original creative designs, but I don't really think design is their greatest strength. The greatest strength for Formex is their manufacturing. The point is, those 5 things in total make up the watch experience, and it's going to be different from brand to brand. Brand, craft, design, manufacturing, movement, manufacturing. All of those 5 things have a cost associated with it. And those 5 things also have a value that translate into a product price and a value proposition. But something funny happens at different price points. At the Rolex price point, you typically see 2 complaints again and again and again. You'll see the complaint that it's all brand and the brand pumps the price too much. And you'll see the complaint that for the price, the manufacturing quality is as good, or at least not sufficiently better than some Chinese brand in some ways, the polish, for example. Expensive watches tend to get called out for being priced too much because of identity, and some people will underrate the complexity of the level of manufacturing that goes into them. But at the price point of Studio Underdog and IFL watches, or even Swatch, an entirely different set of things, but similar things, happens. Two things get brought up.
It's got nothing to do with luxury watches, by the way.
One is it's not even watchmaking. It's just a cheap junk Chinese movement assembled in the UK and then marked up. The other thing is it's just a color dial. It's not that special. Anybody can do that. What happens pretty consistently at the lower price point for non-Chinese brands is a disregard that there could be any possible value add to doing assembly in the UK. And also an assumption that there's no qualitative difference from a Chinese watch and this UK assembled watch. And like Nico said, it's not even real watchmaking anyway, because they didn't make a movement. They didn't forge their own steel. It's just assembly. Assembly isn't given the status of watchmaking, which it maybe isn't if there were some objective definition, but it is a watch and it was made, and at $600 you have to accept some compromises in terms of full in-houseness. It's not horology, it's heavily sourced, absolutely, but it's still something that was made, and whether or not it's a real watchmaker, to me feels snobbish. As to whether it's marked up, the Underdog Guacamole has a ST1901 movement inside. It's a chronograph in a steel case with 50 meters of water resistance. Now here you've got a Chinese-made, Chinese-produced Seagull Panda. Same movement inside, same chronograph function, only 30 meters of water resistance. The Seagull costs $649 and the Studio Underdog costs 600 euros. At the time of this video, that's $680, which is a $30 difference. That's not exactly a huge difference. One is assembled in China, one is assembled in the UK. $30 difference. The act of assembling and testing this watch in the UK has objectively cost the consumer little to nothing. I mean, zippo, zero, zilch, nada, niente, niczego. And then the last part. It's just a colored dial. Studio Underdog have not pioneered a new case manufacturing technique. They haven't developed a movement in-house with a new escapement. But they did design this watch, and IFL did hand paint the dials on their IFL watches. This creative effort that went into these watches did not exist before. The design is part of the watch. The creativity that went into the creation of this watch is part of the value of this watch. Original thought went into the entire lineup. I'll play two clips from this video on why there are so many white paintings. And it's a video about how people react to those seemingly stupid modernist white paintings.
Could be a lot of flies stuck to a bit of paper.
Yeah, because I will put this down on my floor tiles.
These people are describing Robert Ryman's painting Bridge.
I may not understand art, but I do understand the English language, and that's pretentious nonsense.
Did you see the painting that was just a white painting that had nothing on it?
It's like super pretentious meets uber pretentious.
It's tempting to look at one of these paintings and think some jerk just took a tube of white paint and spread it on a canvas, but it's not actually that easy.
Art and creation is not just about color. It's about the idea and how it's realized. Devaluing a dial down to it's just a colored dial is reductive. These dials represent novelty. They are nuanced and there's a clear narrative attached to them. Is it art? It's a fair conversation, but it is a clear original design that not only often looks good, but it's one that not anyone can create. This started as an idea which turned into something that didn't exist before. The same goes for those IFL watches that sell for well above what a base Citizen Tsuyosa costs. Hand painting a good-looking dial has a cost and a value, and that's why it costs more than a regular Tsuyosa. Ultimate test, I think, of whether something is special is when you look at this, do you know who made it? I know that this is a Roy Lichtenstein. I know this is a Warhol. I know the style is Warhol. And I know within a second that this, although it says Moser on the dial, is a Studio Underdog watch. That's how strong the design language is. I know where the idea originated, and that's how strong the idea was. And then there's the small minority of people that says, well, I could have done that. And I'll refer you back to the video.
I could do that. Good.
There's also a lot of art that is more about the idea than it is about skill. And so, yes, you could do it, but you didn't.
Maybe you could, but you didn't. You didn't, and neither did I. Maybe I've gotten a little bit ranty with this one, but I feel it's important because it's so easy to criticize watchmakers these days. And it's not about Studio Underdog. They're just a case example. I don't think it's helpful when you look at a Rolex and just boil it down to its branding and nothing else. It's wrong because branding has a value, and it's not just branding. Those Rolex watches are damned good. Whether or not you personally think it's worth it for you is entirely your call, and it's a perfectly legitimate position to have. But those simple conclusions undervalue the work and the effort that go into making the experience that is the watch. And the same goes for an IFL watch or a Studio Underdog or any manner of low-end creative brands. These primarily Chinese brands made some half-assed copies. They are functionally worse, they are unoriginal. They did not have an independent idea that led to a watch. I have no problem with anyone buying them, fine. But from the manufacturer's perspective, it's just not creative. For me, the point is that the work that goes into making an IFL dial or a main jump hour design or Studio Underdog is one that took an original idea, it took skill, it took time, it took effort, and it's one that neither you nor I could do. Brands like these are rightfully deserving of the praise that they get. They are supplying a form of art or creativity at a price point where there usually isn't a lot of originality. I think this should be respected. And no, these type of watches don't speak to me. I don't wear them, but I do have an understanding and a respect for what they bring to the table. And I don't really think we all should, because creative thought and artistic expression enriches our world and enriches our little community. You don't have to buy them if you don't like them, but these are valuable designs. That's all I had. Like, subscribe. Cheers.